So with the recent fallout of negotiations between Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk, Terence Crawford and Errol Spence, and many other times where we have been close to getting undisputed fights in boxing, all for them to collapse, there's been a lot of talk of adopting a UFC-style promotional outfit where they are ordered by the promotional outfit to fight one another and that there's one collective belt. Now, this may sound nice, but you have to remember that in MMA there are more companies than just the UFC. I don't follow MMA, but I know that Bellator is a promotional outfit, and many of those fighters would have the beating of lots of the UFC guys. So the idea that in MMA the best fight the best all the time is just incorrect. Certainly in UFC, the best UFC fighters fight one another all the time, but that doesn't mean MMA as a whole we see the best fighting the best, because not all the best guys are signed to the UFC, okay? I personally don't have a particular problem with a UFC style promotional outfit as long as there's still room for the fighters to negotiate and to get maximally paid. Because in UFC, although it's less top heavy, the guys at the top still don't get paid anywhere near as much as the guys at the top of boxing. Now that is actually largely because boxing is a more popular sport. People can argue that it isn't, but it is. But largely that's because the majority goes to the promoter. And personally, I think that's the outfit that Eddie Hearn is trying to get to. I'll get to that in another video. But I personally don't think that UFC style promotional outfit is the answer to get unification and undisputed fights. So what is the answer? Well, it's really quite simple. If all the sanctioning bodies come together, WBA, WBC, WBO and IBF, and they agree to enforce unifications and undisputed fights. Now, it's really quite simple how you would figure this out. You just say, if you've had a belt for, say, a year, you get ordered to fight another champion each year, plus a mandatory. So a mandatory defense, plus a champion every single year. You don't get voluntary fights until you are undisputed. Okay? Now, the mandatory fight would, let's say it's the WBO, I believe that's 80-20 in favour of the champion. I don't have a problem with that. And that can, again, I think they should always just be taken to purse bids. If you don't know what a purse bid is, it means any promoter in the world can bid an amount, and then the fighters agree the split. But if the split is already predetermined, as it is with mandatories, then it's really quite simple. This way we don't have people essentially accepting bad deals, things like, well, you have to take rematch clauses and all this kind of stuff if you win. It's just really simple. Whichever company's willing to pay the most, that's where it goes to, and the split is predetermined. Now, for unifications, it's the exact same process. We can predetermine a split and then force it to go to purse bids. Now, personally, I don't like that for unifications, and the reason is we have to accept that some fighters bring more money to the table than others. Okay, and this is one of the reasons that unifications don't happen, is they just cannot determine the split and they just argue with one another. With mandatory, sometimes the mandatory challenger is bringing more money to the table, and as a result, that mandatory will determine a higher split in exchange for a rematch clause if the champion loses, because with mandatories, if the champion loses, then they can't enforce a rematch, but they might say, hey, I'll give you another 10% for a rematch if you win. Personally, I don't like that. I don't think that should be allowed. If you're going to fight your way into a mandatory position, I'd say just accept the lower percentage and accept that you'll be making more as a champion. But in terms of for unification fights, well, we need to just literally look at what was the actual revenue generated from the fight from, say, the opponent's last 3 fights. You could do it based on the average of the last year. The fights they've had in the last year, take the revenue minus the losses, as in what they spent on marketing and all this kind of stuff, and find out what the net profit is. And based on that, determine who has the higher market value. And then that's what the split is. Let's say we had Fury versus Anthony Joshua. Let's say, no, Fury versus Usyk. Go, well, let's say Fury generated 100 million and Usyk generated 120 million. Okay, that's 220 million total. I think off the top of my head, that's 55% or 60% to Alexander Usyk. Now, people will say things like, well, that's not particularly fair because is Usyk really the bigger draw? Because in the last 2 fights, he fought Anthony Joshua. Well, I'd say that's fair to say. But had Tyson Fury not messed about with the split, he could have fought Anthony Joshua. Do you understand? The Undisputed would have been with Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. More times than not, it's going to be fair in regards to the split. Okay, it's not a perfect system, but I think it's a pretty damn good one compared to what we have right now. If we'd had this in 2016 when Anthony Joshua won the world title, we'd have had Joshua versus Wilder in 2017 or in late 2016. There would have been no arguments with the split. We go, right, here's the percentage, it goes to purse bids. If Wilder or Anthony Joshua says, no, we're not doing that because I want hometown advantage or whatever, you strip them. And that's it. You know, it would have been so much easier. We'd have had Undisputed between Klitschko and Wilder, or maybe Wilder would have vacated. Let's say Fury picked that up, we'd have had Undisputed Klitschko and Fury. Now, understand in certain situations, like, for example, Klitschko versus Klitschko, well, I'm opposed to brothers fighting myself, so you could say if they're of relation, then it's not enforced. Or you could just hold them to the standard and say, well, actually, whoever refuses this is going to get stripped. But personally, I think, you know, brother versus brother, that's a special circumstance. We can go, okay, we won't enforce the Undisputed fight, especially since neither of them were arguing over who was better. Vladimir said Vitali's better, Vitali said Vladimir's better. You know very much how brothers would do. But what do you think of this system? Personally, I think it's really quite a good system. You figure out the net profits for their fights over the last year. You divide that by how many fights they've had. So if I've made 150 million net profit and I've had 3 fights in the last year, that's 50 million average. Okay, 50 million. Let's say the other guy made 40 million average over the last year net profits. You know, then based on that, you figure out who the bigger draw is, and then you force it to go to purse bids. Then there's no arguments about, you know, where does the fight take place, who gets home advantage, or any of this. It's just really simple. Bish bash bosh, there you go. And for Undisputed especially, you could put in a rematch clause where you say the winner gets 60% in the rematch. Or if it's, or you could say 5% more. So let's say I was fighting somebody and based on the system I described, I got 60% in the first fight and I won. Then in the rematch, I get 65%. I think that's fair. Tell me what you think and you have yourself a good day. I'm going to make a video on what I think Eddie Hearn's plans are as a promoter, because I've noticed he is very, very conservative with purse bids and all this kind of stuff. And I think personally he is essentially accumulating money so that he can start a UFC style tournament. So keep your eye out for that one. Have yourself a good day and thank you very much. Thank you.